Hey y'all, Data Guy here. So today I got a really cool video showing you how you can create Airflow datasets based on information in S3. So the really important part of this video isn't really the fact that we're using S3, it's the idea of creating Airflow datasets. And so what Airflow datasets are a way for you to visualize the data that is created by your tasks within Airflow. So instead of just relying on a task view, now there's a dataset view where you can look at how data is flowing through your various tasks. Additionally, it gives you the ability to say, hey, once this data set is created, then trigger a downstream task. So you're not just relying on rigid time-based scheduling, you can actually have data set driven scheduling. So in this video, what we'll be doing is showing you exactly that, how you can create a data set within Airflow and then use that to trigger other tasks. So without further ado, let's get into it. So the first thing I want to do is just some pretty basic stuff, import the Airflow dataset library. So this is really the only thing that's pretty new here. That's how we'll initialize and create those data sets. Then you're going to import the DAG and task decorators, date time, and your S3 list prefixes operator and an S3 create object operator. So this is how we're going to be getting the information, the prefixes to create our data set. And then the S3 is going to be creating those objects from that given prefixes. So after you've done all that, you're just going to set a couple variables that you'll be using throughout this DAG. So your S3 bucket, your S3 folder prefix, as well as your S3 bucket delimiter. So this is just default. And then choose my data, your file name, and your AWS connection ID. So in practice, this my data wouldn't contain hi S3 bucket, but here it's just going to be the key of whatever data you're taking from your S3 bucket. So the next thing we'll do is just do a very standard DAG declaration. So typical stuff, set your DAG ID, start date, schedule, catch up, and tags. And then we can get into the actual meat and potatoes, writing our tasks. So let's write our first task in this. So the first thing we'll need to do is just list all of our root level folders. So that's what we're actually going to be generating the data sets from. So set your task ID, AWS connection ID, bucket, your prefix that you're using, and the delimiter. So these are just all those variables that you set previously at the top of the DAG. And this will just give us all the data we need to actually get started creating our data sets. So now what we'll do is set a task that's going to create our data sets from that S3 folder. So here we're passing it that folder list that we just created. And then within this data sets list, for folder and folder list, which I'll show you how you're actually going to link these two tasks later. For each folder, just use a Jinja template to set the URI using your S3 bucket, S3 delimiter, folder, file name, and then create that as a data set. So this URI you're creating is just a data set within Airflow. So this is how you'll reference your data set, obviously with all of these Jinja templates replaced by your actual variables. And then we have a simple print function here just to list them all out, make sure everything is up to snuff before we return a list of data sets. And so that's how we'll actually use these data sets downstream as a list. And now I'm going to live up to my promise and show you how we're going to create this folder list and pass it in. So it's really simple. With the Taskflow API, you can basically just interact with the tasks like their Python functions. So in here, we're going to take the output of our first function, list folders in bucket, dot output. So just reading the output, which is that returned list of the folders, and then passing that list into our create datasets task, which will then create a list of our datasets for us. So really simple and really easy to set up there. So now our next task is going to be creating our objects within S3. So we're going to do dot partial because we want to keep these variables the same, our task ID, AWS connection ID, data, and replace equals true. But we're going to use dynamic task mapping to create X amount of parallel tasks for however many data sets that we want to create within S3. So here we are taking the output of our previous create data sets and then using that to pass them into our S3. So you can see that being done in this list of datasets.map, where we're going .map for all of the URIs contained within that list of datasets. So this is then going to create as many tasks as datasets we have so we can process them in parallel. And so now we have our final task, which is producing two datasets. So basically what this is doing is then taking those S3 objects that we're creating and then producing their corresponding datasets. So we got datasets on datasets on datasets. And so Here, we're writing file S3, which we're setting upstream from produce datasets, where we're then passing that list of datasets that we created to then produce dataset objects for each of those S3 objects that we created. So completing that circle of bringing it into S3, producing datasets from it, and then posting them into S3, and then creating datasets from that as well. So you might notice this is a little circular. That's just because this is kind of a proof of concept. We almost never do this in production because it makes no sense. But I wanted to show you all the different ways you can interact with these datasets. So really fun new feature. I really hope that you learned something from it. I hope you test this out in production yourself. And happy data engineering. Data guy out.